everyone. Welcome back to The Thing About Wildlife in a Nutshell, where you will hear a bite sized story from our guest wildlife first time in their field. Our lives among nature tend to be a string of funny, intimidating, or simply absurd anecdotes, and I'm going to be bringing these to you through some wonderfully diverse and fascinating voices. In today's episode, you will hear a conversation I had with Ishan Patil. He is an early career scientist who is not sure what to call himself yet. Anthropologist, environmental scientist, or social scientist, perhaps. He studied life science at St. Xavier's College in Mumbai and then took a year off to intern close to home with a couple of wildlife NGOs. Next, he did his master's in environmental anthropology at the University of Kent and now works as a research assistant at the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. His interests are varied, from art and video making to social media and social justice, and he's only just getting started. This was a particularly heartwarming conversation for me since Ishan was my intern some years ago, and it's been lovely seeing how far he's come. So here he is, telling us all about how he found his way into this wonderful world of wildlife conservation. Hey Ishan, how are you doing today?
Hey Ishka, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. It's so nice to see you and talk to you. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, it's actually been really great talking to you. I think we haven't done this in a very long time. And yeah, I'm glad to be doing this. It's a way for us to catch up and also talk about all the interesting things happening in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's this is a doubly beneficial uh, recording for me as well because I'm so excited to see everything you've been doing since we worked together now 3 years ago. I can't even believe it's been that long. Um, so I'm going to ask you, since you're probably the youngest person I've spoken to so far for this podcast, and there was a really specific reason for me to talk to you because you're pretty multi-talented and interested in a whole bunch of things, and I've also been able to watch you grow over the years and see you start out just after your bachelor's and trying to figure out what you want to do in the field of wildlife. And I think a lot of your experiences will be very insightful, and I'm also curious to know what this has been like for you. So my first question, I guess, is tell me a little bit about what it was like when you first did your internships right out of college, and what was that experience like for you? What did you take away from those?
Um, it was a very fun experience, if I would put it that way, because I had no idea what I wanted to do after my bachelor's, but I was lucky enough that I had really good teachers and mentors who pushed me to do something, who were very interested in wildlife and conservation and the environment, and also pushed me to pursue my interdisciplinary interests with respect to art and video making. And that is what started me off. And right from my bachelor's, I remember I had lecturers who were like really interested and told me to like pursue arts while also doing science. And that also, I had like really good mentors while I was at CWS and NCF. And there were people who really kind of pushed me to do different kinds of things with science and art. And that was really helpful, and I'm really lucky for that. Also, in that journey of working in the field, I got some great experiences with colleagues and mentors, and I learned a lot of things which I wouldn't have necessarily learned in a formal educational setting. One of those things was, I think, how to how to cope in the field. I think that's something that you're not really taught of in school or college or in your masters. But that's one of the most important things that I picked up while I was working at these different organizations. Because I remember once on field, I was I was working as a conservation educator, and I was working with all these other people who had much more experience than me. I had like 1 month of experience, and these people had years of like 8, 10 years of experience. And I learned how to deal with bureaucracy on the field and how to talk to people, because this is not, because I came from a very urban setting and I didn't know how to deal with people working in different parts of the field. And that kind of was one of the key moments in my experience, which helped me grow as a person. And I have used these skills that I've gained even right now while I was working in the UK.
Yeah, no, I think you're definitely so right. You come out of college, and I think you're very idealistic at that point, which is good because you should be, in some ways, because it gives you that drive. But a lot of those real world skills you just do not learn in a classroom. And I think
Yeah.
you're right. All of those lessons are definitely out there, um, in the field.
Oh, yeah.
And
Like, I think the most basic skills that you need as a researcher, you don't really learn in a classroom. You learn it from peers, and you learn it from seniors who like tell you how to act like when you're in the field, and how to like very tactfully deal with uh, problematic individuals, or like very tactfully deal with uh, different kinds of bureaucracy that are going on in the field.
yeah, no, definitely. And bureaucracy is definitely not something you can teach. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's full of trial and error for sure. So I'm gonna like pull you back a little bit about the interdisciplinarity of your interests, because I think for me also that was something that was so appealing to me when you first reached out and were interested in getting started in this field, because you're an artist. You come from, I think your mom is also an artist, if I'm not mistaken, and so
Yes,
you have,
yes.
yeah, so she has, so you had that kind of background growing up, and then you also have your own personal interests towards the environment and people and places, and so there are many things you want to do. And you're very often hurdled or into one box, but I think you've so far done a really good job of trying to keep that box open and trying to mix a lot of these things. So what has that been like for you? If you could go into a little more detail about that, and how are you mixing these different skills that you have?
So there was a brief period after my bachelor's where I considered completely shifting fields. So I got a bachelor's in life sciences, so it was very science, biology related, and I took a lot of papers in ecology, and it. Uh, but after that, I wanted to do something more artsy, and I considered switching fields. I was like, okay, I'm done with the sciences, and I want to go to an art school. And for many reasons, that didn't really work out the way I had planned to. And I decided, okay, you know what, I still like wildlife. Maybe I'll try something to do. Maybe I'll try to work in a field where I can do something with art, but I can always use my science on the side. And that's why I reached out to you. I remember this was in the summer of 2019, maybe. Uh, and I was like, oh, like these are all my skills, and I can paint. And like, if you need any help, let me know. And thanks to you, and like after that, multiple people like you who were like, yes, we do need someone who likes science and art. And that was the push that I needed, because once I started doing the art, I also realized that I didn't just want to do one thing. I didn't just want to be a fine artist. And it's great, like art is amazing. But for me, it wasn't the most fulfilling thing. And I also wanted to do research, because I went into science because I was always intrigued by these natural things, and I wanted to do like hardcore research. So that kind of brought me to my next step, where I wanted to do research, but not at the cost of my art. So I made sure that whatever research I was doing, I will include something. I will make sure art is included in it in some way. And I did that for my master's. When I did my dissertation, I was like, well, I'm not just going to make this into a written piece of work. I'm going to make sure my abstract is going to be graphical, and I'm going to make sure my results are in the form of a comic. So I did that. And I drew my results and I drew my abstract. And I think that was one of the most fulfilling experiences because, well, I posted it on different social media and I realized, well, people understand this much more than just a written piece of academic work. And that's what I want to do now. Now uh, I'm going to start work at this research institute up in Scotland. And one of the reasons I was hired here was because of my artistic skills. And they want me as a researcher because I bring art to the table. And they want me to make graphical abstracts. They want me to make videos of like science research that I do. And they want me to use all these multidisciplinary and mixed media techniques to make research more accessible. And I think that's my goal. It all comes down to making research more accessible through art. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it's very encouraging to hear that there are so many avenues in which a dynamic skill set like this can be used. And I think, like we were discussing a little earlier as well, just publishing in academic papers does not go very far. It still stays within a very tiny community. And especially as you go deeper into academic research and you get higher and more specialized in your field, the pool of people who read your research also becomes smaller and smaller as you get more and more specialized. So it's great that you're able to use graphics to represent these things and hopefully reach slightly larger audiences and actually get the right people to pay attention to the work that you're doing. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So I'm actually going to ask you a little more about, social media and using some of these other spaces for conservation and for messaging. And I know you've done a little bit of work during your masters in figuring out how social media helps with activism and the demographics involved and what that means on a very sociological level. And it's very exciting to see you move into that space as well, going from more ecological work and looking at things from a very sociological perspective, because like we've spoken about so much on this podcast as well, when you're doing conservation, a lot of your work truly lies with the people, regardless of how much you love trees or plants or animals, uh, or anything for that matter. So tell me a little more about that and how those spaces are being used right now.
So it during my masters, moved into more anthropology, and I was really interested in behavior and how people respond, and this is specifically related to the environment, how people respond to their environment. And I've always been interested in social, I would say, in research related to social media and how people are represented there and how people behave on social media. And I was just trying something out with Twitter and looking at how people behave on Twitter and how activism is represented on Twitter. And especially during COVID, because all the activism movements that were happening in India, they kind of moved online overnight. uh, there was that inherent inequality online because, as you know, in India, not everyone has the same internet access, and there's gender, caste, and urban rural inequality in internet access. So, obviously, there is inequality in social media activism too, because not everyone has internet. And a lot of these activism movements are around people who live in these rural areas and who make use of these natural resources. So I was interested in knowing, well, how are these people represented online? Because, well, they are not present online, or very few of them are present online. So how are they talked about in these online spaces? And I went on to do this Twitter research, and I realized that, well, they are represented quite poorly online, and there isn't transparency online. There is a lot of fake news. There isn't, obviously, because people are not present online, we don't know what is real, what the on ground truths are. A lot of people are used as just political pawns, and not really, their real problems aren't represented online, and which is obviously a huge problem. So as an urban activist, I wanted to know, well, how can we change some of these things? And that was kind of the goal of this research. So I did write an academic paper about it, but I didn't think that was the most I didn't think that was the best use of the data that I had gotten. So now I'm thinking of ways in which we can use this data on online activism and representation of minorities in positive ways, and how we can change our social media use to make sure we represent people, really represent more marginalized people in these online debates.
That's good. That's really wonderful. And I hope you manage to find those platforms, because definitely more people getting into research and even working with social media for different movements, they need to be thinking about these things, thinking about the intersectionality when it comes to these movements, because it can't always be the urban upper elite doing these things, because the
Yeah.
problem doesn't lie in a bubble, and social media is quite a bubble. So it's great to know a little bit more about this and be aware of what is missing. I think we very rarely talk about that.
Mhm.
um, Wonderful, that's so great. um, so I'm also going to ask you, maybe just to wind up right now, a little bit more about what do you think it's been like just stepping foot into this anthropological pool and trying to, play around with ethnographies and work with people? What has that been like for you as somebody just exploring this for the first time and figuring it out, because it's such a vast world? And yeah, maybe just share that with us.
I would say, like, first eye opening, and just uh, we were just talking about this, but a huge kind of, not in a bad way, but an ethical minefield, because I think you are working with real people, you are working with human beings who deserve to be treated with respect. And in a lot of times, as urban researchers, a lot of people don't realize that, and they kind of approach people as data points, which I'm not going to lie, I have done in the past, and have not thought about the repercussions of research. And I think that was one of the most eye-opening things that happened to me while doing anthropological research, is understanding how important it is to uh, navigate things ethically, and treat people with the utmost respect that they deserve. And and as a young researcher, I think often, especially when you're working in ecology and you're not working with people, you are obviously used to kind of just collecting data, because the data is related to trees, related to animals, and you don't really think a lot about the people surrounding. But in anthropology, when you are doing this kind of research, it is very important to remember that your to remember your responsibility towards your participants. And I think I realized this. So when I was, as a young researcher, all of us have to do these ethics forms, and ethics approvals, and ethics communities. And I think a lot of us have rolled our eyes on it, and been like, okay, this is just unnecessary bureaucracy, and why do we need to do that? And I've definitely done that. And the first time I was filling an ethics form, I was like, well, this is so lame, and I don't understand why I have to do it. But you only realize the responsibility once you are on the field, and once you're talking to people, and once you realize that the things that people tell are stories and uh, are very important parts of their lives that they are sharing with you, and this is not just data. And then you need to understand how important these things are and not take it lightly. So I think that's one of the biggest things as a young researcher working with people I've realized is ethics is extremely important. Obviously, ethics are important, but I think you take them for granted a lot of times. And as someone who has just stepped into the field, we all need to remember that.
Amazing. Thanks, Ishan. And I can't tell you how happy it makes me to hear you say that, especially at the outset, because ethics are maybe one of the biggest problems of when a lot of people who have been trained only in ecology and the pure sciences, and at some point you realize that a lot of your work does lie with people and you need to work with them or interview them for more information. And this whole problem of looking at them through the lens of data is never works on field, because it doesn't help building trust, it doesn't help with the mutual respect, and it's just wrong, right? You can't treat human beings like that. And I too have seen some of the negative repercussions of that sort of treatment of people in field, where you just think they owe you data, wherein they're actually giving you doing you a huge favor and sharing their knowledge with you, right? So that's definitely something that everyone needs to be very conscious about. And I'm so glad that you've already set foot on that path. So yeah. So thanks so much, Ishan. It was wonderful talking to you today and catching up after ages. The pandemic has contributed to me not knowing at all what you've been up to. So it's nice to know now. And I'm just so proud of everything you've become and that you're becoming. And good luck.
Thank you. This podcast actually made, I mean, I listen to this podcast a lot, and I've been listening to it on the train ride and on my commute. And the questions really made me uh think about the things that I've done in the last 3 or 4 years, and what their and the implication, and basically how I've grown as a person in the last few years. So thank you so much. It was great talking to you, Ishika, and I'm looking forward to season 2.
Yay! You're part of it, and that makes me so happy. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon when you've
Yeah.
done even more cool stuff. Can't wait to see what's up next.
Thanks for having me here. See you later.
Thanks for listening.